It's that kind of law and order that Epsom residents want to see more of. Now, we've got a question from student Samantha Zhang on this exact issue. Samantha.
With the escalating rate of violence in recent times, what are your plans to keep New Zealand streets safe?
Rodney Hyde.
We've got three key policies. The first is we need to establish a zero-tolerance policy for crime. That means the police go after every crime and don't look the other way. I've just been up at the Parnell RSA and the secretary there was hit in the face badly, had to go to hospital several times, rang the police, they still haven't come. That was 2 weeks ago. So we need to have a zero tolerance for crime, that we actually go after the taggers, the petty burglaries, and send a signal to the young offenders that crime doesn't pay. The second thing that we need to do is we do need to toughen up on sentencing. I think the National Party goes some way, but I think we can go further. We need to abolish parole totally. I think it's wrong that we have the families' victims having to go through the agony of a parole board hearing and relive the crime. And here's the key one, for violent offenders, 3 strikes and you're out. That would have saved 77, well, it does work, sir, because there are 77 people who were murdered who, if we had 3 strikes and you're out, would still be alive. And I actually go and see their families and their victims, and you can sit there and say it doesn't work and smirk all you like, right? It does work. If we had that policy, they'd still be alive. And we stand here proudly as the ACT Party and as the MP for Epsom, standing up for each and every one of you to keep you safe.
I'd like, first of all, Richard Worth, we will come to you shortly. I just want to hear a response first from Keith Locke. Zero tolerance, no parole, 3 strikes and you're out.
Well, parole is important for a transition of the criminal into society, and rehabilitation is the key, because most of the violent offences, like the ones we saw on the TV screen, are committed by people who have already been in jail. And at the moment, the prisons, you just need to go down to Mount Eden Prison here, as I have, and they're schools for crime, not schools for rehabilitation. We've got to change that around. I would support a variation of 3 strikes and you're out. That is 2 strikes and you're out for white-collar criminals in the finance companies who diddled people out of their life savings. The same when they did it 20 years ago during the Rogernomics period. They should, but I think that might deplete the ACT numbers too much.
What about this, Keith? What about this, Keith? What about 2 strikes and you're out for the Prime Minister who's robbed all the money from the taxpayer? 2 strikes and you're out.
The other part of the Green policy,
or stealing if the Prime Minister okay,
is to, at a community level, get the young kids when they're starting to move into crime, which means stopping them from dropping out of school and having nothing to do, giving them a decent education, and the best way of solving crime is giving people a job. And that's why the economic policies that we'll be talking about tonight are so important.
I'll come to Richard first. Richard Worth. Richard Worth. Will that sort of community approach work in Epsom?
Only partly. Here are 3 further points that I think are significant. The first is, if you can catch criminals with a high degree of certainty, you can significantly take away the motivation for crime. Because the one thing a criminal does not want is to be caught. National's got some very clear policies about a considerably expanded use of DNA testing. And if you go to a crime scene, you'll invariably find blood or semen or hair or something like that. We plan to do what they've done in the UK and build a significant database so that there can be very quick matching of offender and real evidence left at a crime scene. That's the first thing. The second thing is we do need to tighten up on parole. It is utterly unacceptable that there are substantial and serious offences occurring when criminals have been released on parole. And the third thing we have to deal with, and it was shown on the video before, we have to take a much harder attitude to organised crime and the manufacture and selling of drugs. Labor has failed in that area, failed completely.
Okay, I'm just going to give a quick last word to Kate. Give me a quick last word.
We need to look at the facts in this situation. We've put 2,500 more police on the street. We're solving 10,000 more crimes a year. We have the second highest incarceration rate in the world, and that is appalling. What we need to do is we need to focus on jobs and we need to focus on education, and that's how we're going to get criminals off the street.
All right. I'm not going to come to your problem yet, Rodney. We might get to that later. But you've just said focusing on jobs. Well, that's where we should probably go at this stage. We're going to take another quick break. But coming up, arguably, the driving issue for this election, the economy.
Discover our history.
We had no idea what did happen was going to happen.
Our people.
And glide like a 747.
Our stories. By New Zealanders for New Zealanders. Made in NZ. Every day on TVNZ7. Yes, they're problems.
One of the most staggering ecological disasters of the 20th century.
We're working on the answers.
The waters and fish have returned.
On Earth Report. Then on Unreported World. Forgotten victims.
1.5 million people have been moved ahead of the Olympic Games.
Fighting for survival.
Everybody here is out to control the drugs trade.
The battle for scarce resources.
They're abused in the street.
Information changes things. Earth Report, followed by Unreported World on TVNZ7.
Remember the famous line from Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992? It's the economy, stupid. Well, maybe this election it is. New Zealand was already technically in recession when the banking crisis hit, and now growth looks likely to be static or minimal for at least the next year. Here's Wallace again.
The residents of the Epsom electorate are some of the highest earners in the country. They're hard-working people who want to know they're getting value for their tax dollar, and they want sound management of the economy to ensure New Zealand's prosperity. Almost half of Epsom families earn $100,000 or more per year. That's the largest proportion of any electorate, so a reduction in the top tax rate is a hot topic.
I know I work very hard to pay a lot of taxes.
Well, tax is always way too high. I'm quite happy to pay a reasonable amount of tax, provided it's exchanged for good hospitals and education.
But tax cuts alone won't be enough, not with the turmoil on world financial markets and recession on our shores. Epsom's Newmarket is the second biggest business district in Auckland. In good times, it helps boost the economy. But instead, the Newmarket Business Association says its members are struggling.
The government should have really taken the bull by the horns and looked at taxation, looked at compliance costs and all the bureaucratic red tape that strangles business on a day-to-day basis.
It's not just current policy worrying voters. Local software developers say National's plan to axe the R&D tax credits is appalling.
They mentioned that they were going to drop the research and development budget, and I thought that was the worst thing they could ever do.
That's true. They talk about the brain drain in this country, and then they go ahead and encourage it by trying to stop companies doing R&D work. It's not really for the best.
With tough economic times ahead, Epsom is looking for a candidate who will promote their prosperity. Well, we've got a question from Susan Mackay, Epsom resident, living on a low-income solo mum. Susan.
I'd like to know what policies your parties would have for lower income people, the single parents like me paying crazy rent so their kids can go to school in the zone, the immigrant families squashed in the flat across the road from me, and the elderly people who can probably barely pay their rates.
That's the other side. That's the other side of Epsom. Richard Worth.
Are you on a benefit at the moment or not?
No,
No, you're working. Okay, so I can answer that maybe more generally. Look, the last 9 years, in terms of the government's plans for economic transformation, have been a disaster. I can't physically identify one aspect where the economy has been transformed in a positive way. Basically, we've had 9 years of substantial profits which have been generated by the system, and that money has been wasted in low-quality spend. And so we've seen, for example, a substantial increase in bureaucracies like the Ministry of Education, like the Ministry of Health. What should have been done is a strengthening of frontline services, of police, of teachers, of nurses, of doctors. That has not happened.
How will that help? Richard Worth.
So what are we going to do?
How will
We're
that
going
help,
to do five things. These 5 things start with personal tax cuts. They start with personal tax cuts. They go on from there to an infrastructure spend.
All right, we're not going to go through all 5. Start with personal tax cuts. Kate.
As we're going through a recession, we need a government that we can trust to take us through the hard
I didn't know you were going to vote X.
When we came in 1999, we had a 20% $22 billion government debt. Now it's $2 billion. We inherited 161,000 unemployed people. Now it's at 8.